Ola knelt by the pool, tightly clutching the unconscious Siwon in his arms. Blood stained the water red. Siwon, don't die, Siwon. Not until I take revenge on that man. Even in death, I cannot find peace. Our fates have been completely changed. Don't die. Ola held her body tightly and lowered his head. He remained silent, his gaze gradually turning cold. Suddenly, he opened his mouth, revealing sharp fangs, and leaned down to bite Siwon's neck. By signing a contract with a vampire, we have been bound tightly together by a shared destiny. A few months ago, Siwon sat alone at the end of a long table, facing a vast and silent dining room. A maid walked in carrying a tray. "Miss Siwon Ligwin, please enjoy." The maid suddenly tilted the plate, and scalding soup poured down. It soaked Siwon's hair and her long dress. She remained frozen in place, letting the liquid drip down her cheeks. Two maids stood nearby, covering their mouths and letting out piercing sneers, their eyes filled with contempt. Rotten soup. Siwon stared at the murky liquid on the table, her hands pressed tightly against the surface, her fingertips trembling slightly. What is the meaning of this? The maid had a scornful smile on her face and gave an insincere, slight bow. "I sincerely apologize to you. My hand slipped, and I accidentally spilled it." Siwon lowered her head, her hair covering half of her face, her teeth clenched. She suddenly slammed the table and stood up. "I am your master's fiancé." She glared at the two women in front of her, her chest heaving with anger. "Do you think this kind of treatment is acceptable?" The maid stood side by side, looking down at her with cold expressions. "If you're dissatisfied, why don't you just go back to your hometown?" A corner of the maid's mouth curled up. "Of course, you should be well aware of the consequences the Ligwin family would face if they defied the royal family's orders." Siwon stood frozen on the spot, her fingernails digging deep into her palms. The maids walked away arrogantly, their receding mockery echoing in her ears. "Why do I have to suffer this kind of treatment? I was born in the westernmost territory of the kingdom, the youngest daughter of Lord Ligwin. Siwon was once praised as an angel and grew up amidst everyone's admiration. However, the royal decree suddenly arrived. To stabilize the royal power that had been shaken 3 years ago, the king forced a marriage between two great families. One was the Ligwin family, who guarded the border, and the other was the Dearson family, located near the capital. Aster Dearson, he is the head of the Dearson family, my fiancé, and my first love. 10 years ago in the capital, I suddenly fell ill during a banquet. Siwon curled up alone on a vast terrace, her body shivering from the pain. Aster walked in slowly and reached out with a smile. She looked up into those gentle eyes. I once firmly believed that this man was my destined partner. When I learned that the royal marriage partner was Aster, I felt an unprecedented happiness. Siwon clutched the letter tightly, her cheeks flushed with a rosy hue, her eyes full of anticipation. The reunion after 10 years was close at hand. Her heart pounded wildly. The carriage slowly stopped in front of the Dearson Manor. Siwon lifted the curtain and looked at the magnificent mansion, her lips unable to stop from curving upward. However, what awaited me was a completely different reality. Siwon stood alone before the cold iron gates of the manor, carrying her heavy suitcases. A maid walked ahead expressionlessly, leading her through a dim and oppressive hallway. There was no welcome here, only endless coldness. What should have been a happy married life turned into day after day of torment. Siwon was placed in a simple, dilapidated guest room. The furniture was covered in dust, and not a trace of warmth could penetrate the window. "The bath is ready. Please come this way." The maid roughly grabbed Siwon's arm, trying to drag her toward the bathroom. "Let go of me." Siwon struggled fiercely, lost her balance, and fell heavily onto the cold floor. She propped herself up, a fire of anger burning in her eyes as she stared at the arrogant servant before her. "You are not worthy of speaking to me. Go and call Lord Aster." Lord Aster is not in the manor. The maids stood in a line, hands folded in front of them, looking down coldly at Siwon as she sat on the floor. "I have been here for 10 whole days and haven't seen him once. Isn't that strange? Lord Aster is very busy and won't be back anytime soon." Siwon looked up, her gaze scanning the maids' faces. "Lies. I can see lies. This isn't a metaphor. Since birth, those who lie to me have a hypocritical mask appear on their faces. Lord Aster." Siwon's pupils suddenly contracted. She pushed the maids aside and dashed toward the end of the hallway, regardless of everything. "Miss Siwon, please wait." She held up her skirt and hurried through the long corridor. Siwon stopped abruptly, panting for breath. A familiar figure appeared at the end of her vision. Aster. He was wearing a sharp, light blue suit, standing coldly amidst a backdrop of blooming flowers. In those eyes, there was no joy of reunion, only a frost-like chill. You still haven't crawled back to your hometown? Siwen froze. She had finally seen him. He would surely explain everything clearly. Lord Aster, why are you treating me like this? There must be some misunderstanding. Aster suddenly swung his arm, creating a sharp gust of wind. Siwen let out a cry, lost her balance, and fell backward, landing heavily on the ornate carpet. Lord Aster, what are you doing? Siwen sat on the floor, looking up at the man before her. Aster turned slightly, looking down with a gloomy gaze. Don't come near me again, you barbarian. What? Siwen's pupils trembled, and her breath hitched instantly. Aster, straightening his cuffs, his tone was bone-chillingly cold. There is one thing I must make clear. I already have someone I love. Just as I was preparing to marry the woman I love, the royal family issued an order forcing me to marry someone from the Lygwin family, the descendants of those barbarians. Aster walked away, his leather shoes clicking sharply on the floor. Siwen sat paralyzed on the spot, watching his receding back. What was he saying? Why? Why didn't a mask appear on Lord Aster's face? In name, you're indeed my wife. Aster's back was to the window, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. But the person I love, and the mother of my future heir, lives in that annex you can see outside your window. He turned his head slightly, casting a cold gaze outside. To me, but my only love is Ola. Siwen looked up, her expression full of shock. A wife in name only, while the woman in the annex. Isn't that just a mistress? Aster began to walk, his shoes making heavy thuds on the floor. Don't even dream of approaching me, and don't get any. Dot twisted ideas. Stay quietly in that filthy room and recognize your place. He left without looking back, leaving only a resolute silhouette. Siwen sat slumped on the floor, watching the light and shadow fade away. A chill spread from her fingertips to her entire body. The man I had always longed for was actually looking at me with such hateful eyes. A maid rushed over to support her staggering body. In the dim room, sunlight slanted through the window, falling on the edge of the empty bed, permeated by a deathly silence. Siwen was suddenly not pushed forward. She lost her balance and slammed heavily against the closed door, making a dull thud. Lord Aster, why has it become like this? Aster's face showed irritation, his eyes filled with undisguised contempt. He called me a barbarian and asserted he would never love me. There was no mask on Lord Aster's face. This meant everything he said was the truth, including the fact that he already had a lover. She had originally been determined to resolve this situation, but reality was now like shards of a broken mirror that could not be pieced back together. At the end of the empty corridor, a blinding white light shone through, as if to swallow all hope. Siwen walked quickly down the hallway. I want to write a letter to my father. Go and prepare paper and a pen. The maid stopped and turned her head coldly. Until the wedding ceremony is over, please do not contact the Lygwin family. Siwen spun around, her eyes widening in anger. Then at least let me see Lord Aster one more time. The maid bowed slightly, her voice stiff and unquestionable. It is strictly forbidden for an unmarried woman to meet her fiancé privately before the wedding. Moreover, unseemly things might occur. All of Siwen's requests were rejected. She could only stand alone in the empty corridor, watching the maids receding back. Siwen stood by the window, looking through the glass at the distant manor building. That was where Aster lived. From this angle, everything was clearly visible. She suddenly held her breath, her fingertip against her lower lip, a flash of surprise in her eyes. A familiar figure appeared at the end of her sight. Aster was holding a bouquet of bright red flowers, standing before the door of that building. He went in and out several times a day to visit Ola, who lived inside. Siwen lowered her eyes, her expression becoming complex and deep. Lord Aster goes to see her every day while I am kept locked up here. Aster stood on the third-floor balcony, overlooking the courtyard below. That gaze seemed to be scrutinizing, appearing exceptionally cold in the deep night. That must be where Lord Aster's lover lives. Siwen stood by the window, watching the manor opposite through the glass. I also tried to go and see her once, but the result was unsatisfactory. A maid suddenly grabbed Siwen's arm, her expression anxious and rude. Please stop causing trouble for Lord Aster. Siwon shook off the other's grip, her brow furrowed. Why are you shouting at me? A mere servant dares to have improper thoughts about Lord Aster? The maid's secret was hit, and her cheeks instantly turned bright red. She gritted her teeth and gripped her apron tightly, but couldn't say a single word in rebuttal. Siwon coldly withdrew her gaze and ignored the commotion behind her, turning to look out the window. Aster was still standing at the edge of the balcony, his hands on the railing, quietly gazing into the distance. Aster's expression was cold as his gaze drifted past the balcony's edge. Lord Aster. The balcony door was pushed open. Aster was attentively accompanying a woman. Ola leaned against Aster, the two of them talking in low voices, their manner intimate and natural. Siwon's eyes widened, her pupils contracting from extreme shock. Her gaze was locked onto that scene. Aster, that was looking at Ola tenderly, with a smile she had never seen before. Tears welled up in her eyes, and Siwon gave a desolate smile. I will never forgive you for daring to fool me like this. Siwon clenched her fists, her nails digging deep into her palms. Aster Dearson, I must have my revenge. I won't let that man have it easy. Night fell. The windows of the annex glowed with dim lamplight, appearing exceptionally oppressive in the quiet night. The entire building, that was sunk in a deathly sleep. Inside the bedroom, the bed curtains were disarrayed and clothes were scattered on the floor, carrying an ambiguous and dangerous atmosphere. Aster leaned down, cupped the other's face, and kissed deeply. Ola reached out a finger and gently pressed it against his lips. This won't do, Lord Aster. Aster stopped, his eyes a bit dazed as he gazed at the woman before him. A playful smile curled at the corner of Ola's mouth, his eyes full of cunning. Don't you already have a fiancé, Lord Aster? Aster leaned close to his ear again, his voice low and raspy. But the only person I love is you, Ola. So, he reached out, his palm pressing against Ola's thigh. Ola pressed down on the back of his hand, gently stopping him. Please wait. I'm truly happy to hear you say that. He lifted his hand, his fingertips softly stroking Aster's face, though a hint of worry showed in his eyes. But the fact that you are about to marry makes me feel very uneasy. Lord Aster. Aster fell into silence. I understand. Aster seemed to have made a decision, his expression turning cold. In that case, I will drive that woman away immediately. He released his embrace and turned toward the door. I'll be back soon. Please wait for me until then. Ola sat on the edge of the bed, his purple shawl slipping down to his elbow. Strands of hair fell across his chest. Oh my! He finally gave in. He raised his hand, hooked his fingers into that long, pale gold hair, and suddenly yanked it back. The entire wig was casually tossed onto the floor. Ola stood, got up, and shed the gorgeous purple lace dress, stepping onto the thick carpet with bare feet. He thought, I didn't expect him to fall so deep, especially when the person he loves is a man dressed as a woman. He raised the back of his hand to wipe his lips forcefully, his eyes showing undisguised disgust. That damn man. What a troublesome job. Well, so be it. Siwon stepped onto the window frame, her dark green robe, swaying with her movements. Since the surveillance has tightened, I can't leave the room through normal means. She flipped out of the window, her hands gripping the edge. A maid stood guard before the closed door, hands folded over her apron and head lowered, completely unaware that the room was already empty. I absolutely cannot remain silent about such terrible treatment. Siwon grabbed onto the vines and struggled to slide down the outer wall. She had even thought about dismantling the bed to make a weapon to attack Aster directly. But the opponent was from a ducal family, and none of the servants here could be trusted. If she acted rashly, she would only be bitten back and turned into the villain. Whoosh! Her feet landed steadily. Siwon let out a long breath and tidied her wrinkled skirt. I'm not just cute, I'm simply the best. Siwon looked up, out at the high terrace of the Duke's mansion. Running away meant defying a royal order, which could bring disaster to her family. It is not rare for nobles to have mistresses, but giving such importance to one before even getting engaged is absolutely unacceptable. I will definitely find that woman's weakness and completely escape this predicament. She lifted the hem of her green dress and crossed the empty, silent courtyard. For the past 10 days, I've been investigating Aster and Ola's movements, as well as the moments when the guards are most lax. I must not miss this perfect opportunity today. I must deal with that home-wrecking woman. The people of Lygwyn never back down. They are meant to crush any encroaching enemy, even if it costs their lives. That man who called those who died for their country barbarians. I will make him pay the price. Just a little more. Siwon clung to the edge of the terrace, her fingertips digging into the stone bricks. As long as she flipped over, she could leave. Ola looked down at the intruder below. His purple lace dress carried a chill in the moonlight, and a shadow covered the upper half of his face. Siwen stared in horror, her breath hitching instantly. Cold sweat slid down her cheek as her gaze collided with those deep eyes above. Help! Her foot slipped, and she lost her balance, falling backward. Her fingertips clawed futilely at the air as she let out a desperate cry. Impossible. Siwen fell backward, her long hair scattering wildly in the wind. A hand suddenly shot out from the railing and gripped her wrist tightly, stopping her fall. By Ola? She looked up in shock, breathing heavily, her eyes full of disbelief. Yes, I am Ola. He stabilized his center of gravity, his voice trembling slightly. More importantly, do you realize your current situation? Oh, Siwon suddenly snapped back to her senses, her hands propped on the edge of the terrace. She flipped over the railing and panted heavily. Thank you. Siwon lowered her head, her hands tightly clutching her skirt, her voice as thin as a mosquito's. You are Miss Siwon, right? I've heard about you from the Duke. Yes, that's right. Siwon straightened her back and looked directly at the mysterious woman. My name is Siwon Ligwin. Siwon's eyes suddenly widened. What is going on with that face? Siwon took a step forward, staring intently at the other's face. A pale eye mask that covered the face. My face. Ola tilted his head slightly, his voice still as steady as water. Just how many lies do you have to tell to look like that? Siwon gritted her teeth. She had never seen such a terrifying mask. What on earth are you lying about? I am not lying, Miss Siwon. Ola stood quietly. Why would you say such things? Siwon stared at that eerie mask. Every time I see someone covering part of their face, I always wonder what would happen if the mask covered. Not the whole face. Are you hurt? Ola took a step closer. You almost fell just now. I was worried. Ultimately, when you lie, a boundary is drawn like magic. This woman just pulled me up with one hand, but showed no signs of fatigue, and even her breathing wasn't labored. Are you actually a man? Siwon suddenly looked up, her eyes full of suspicion and alertness. Stop acting. This kind of strength is not something a woman could have. That's not true. What's wrong? Miss Siwon, look, I can see through lies. Siwon, presta closer. And you were lying to me just now. A man is actually disguising himself as a woman. A mocking smile curled on her lips, her eyes cold with the certainty of victory. Hey, if the Duke heard your lies, what do you think he would think? Siwon took a step forward, her green leather shoes clicking on the floor. The Duke might not believe my words, but among the servants who hear the rumors, someone will always choose to believe. At least the seeds of doubt have been planted. Depending on your next move, you might hide it for now. But if the rumors spread among the servants? Siwon turned her head, a victorious smile on her lips. Sooner or later, it will reach Aster's ears. She suddenly reached out and tightly gripped the other's slender wrist, her fingertips tensed with force. Hey, as a mere mistress, you're using the top-tier perfume from the capital. Siwon leaned close to his ear, her eyes playful and scrutinizing. Well, I can only wash up briefly like a bird playing in water. Isn't that strange? You are the mistress, and I am the legitimate wife. Right, Ola? Are you threatening me? Ola lowered his eyes, his pale gold hair covering half of his face. A trace of cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Threatening? Heavens, of course not. This is an order, but it's not difficult. I don't plan to drive you away. As long as you listen to me, everything. That'll be fine. Ola, help me make Aster fall in love with me. Siwon suddenly leaned in, her hands on the other's shoulders. Ola's body stiffened, his expression full of shock. I want to take revenge on that man. I will make him fall deeply in love with me, then completely destroy him and throw him away like trash. That's how it is. Even with a royal marriage contract, I'm still being treated unfairly. Siwon sat before the vanity, arms crossed, her expression full of resentment. It's almost like being treated as a criminal. Don't you think this is too much? What should I do? Ola lowered his eyes, his fingertips gently stroking his hair, lost in thought. Since coming to this house, I haven't seen that man treat any woman normally. Although the royal family ordered them to live together, don't worry, we'll kick her out soon. If that commoner dares to marry, we can do the same. They plan to drive me out, not through official means, but with those despicable schemes. Siwon angrily waved her arms, pointing at the ornate furnishings. The room they gave me is like a storage locker, while you live in a room fit for a princess. So why do you want to make him fall in love? Ola tilted his head slightly, a hint of scrutiny in his eyes as he watched the agitated young girl. Because he comes from a ducal family. Siwon, clench your fists. Even if I try to resist, I have no chance of winning against a ducal family so closely tied to the royals. That would only make me look pathetic. Even a formal protest would be useless. She slumped back onto the sofa, her body trembling slightly with anger, her hair a bit messy. Ola stood silently to the side, watching Siwon's back with a deep and faintly melancholic gaze. I don't want them to think I'm a coward who ran back to the border. Since this is a royal decree, this marriage is absolute. So, I'm gonna make him fall in love with me, toy with him completely, and then dump him. By the time he falls in love, I'll have no feelings left for him. I'll make him go through all those futile efforts. It's the retribution he deserves. I'll make him regret that he dared to despise my people. Siwon held her clenched fist high. She declared with an impassioned expression. Aster Dearson. Ola lowered his eyes, his pale gold hair covering one side of his face, his gaze cold and deep. That man has become very troublesome lately. At first, everything was simple. He was satisfied just looking at me. But recently, he has begun to desire my body. Every time, I find an excuse to avoid him, but refusing him is becoming harder and harder. If this continues, my true gender will eventually be discovered. I only came this far for a mission that must be completed. I absolutely cannot be exposed. This woman's ability to see through lies. Since she's guessed my true identity, she might be someone worth trusting. I might be able to use her. Then it's a deal. What should I do? Ola sat on an ornate chair surrounded by flowers, his light brown hair falling over his lace dress, his eyes showing a faint melancholy. Then for now, let me live with you. Siwon crossed her arms, a determined smile on her lips. We'll even bathe together. I never want to use that broken bathroom again. She thought of that simple bathtub, and her expression instantly became resentful. That place is simply torture. Ah, I see. Ola lowered his eyes slightly, revealing a helpless, faint smile. Is this really okay? An unmarried woman living in the same room as a man, even bathing together? He turned his head, his eyes, carrying a hint of scrutiny. I know your secret. Siwon spread her hands and leaned back naturally against the sofa. Since I have leverage over you, you wouldn't dare do anything to me. Besides, someone who sneaks into a duke's manor under an alias must have a goal they can't easily give up. What do you think? I might be planning to expose you right now. Ola listened in silence, his eyes gradually becoming calm as he watched the swaying shadows of flowers outside. That's a lie. Another hypocritical crack has appeared on your ugly mask. Siwon turned her face, a playful smile on her lips. Give it up, I'm no fool. So, Ola lowered his eyes slightly, his pale gold hair covering half of his cheek, his expression calm and deep. If she lives in my room, Aster Dearson won't come looking for me anymore. That way, I won't have to worry about being caught while bathing. Perhaps this isn't a bad thing. All right, the negotiation is settled. Ola looked up, his gaze returning to its usual coldness. Heavens, this isn't a negotiation, it's an order. Siwon spread her hands, appearing somewhat helpless. But it's fine. She reached out, palm up in an invitation, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. Let's work together, Ola. Ola turned his head slightly, his eyes showing a hint of aloofness. By the way, what is your name? Siwon suddenly grabbed the other's arm and pressed for an answer. Taz, he responded softly, his pale gold hair scattered over his purple dress, his expression cold and calm. That's a lie. Siwon leaned down and stared intently into his eyes. Lying comes as naturally as breathing to you, doesn't it? Ola stared silently ahead, a trace of an imperceptible ripple flashing in his eyes. It's fine. I already expected you to lie. How could I trust someone I've known for less than an hour? She turned around and pointed at him with a bright smile. I just wanted you to know that I can see through all your lies. Haha, you really are a difficult person. I don't want to hear that from you. Ola. Siwon narrowed her eyes slightly, a sharp light flashing in her pupils as she watched her target. Let's get started right away. The morning light flooded over the manor spires. Siwon curled up in the soft bedding, her orange-pink hair scattered on the pillow as she let out a lazy murmur. She slowly opened her eyes and looked at the ornate bed canopy. The bed was soft and not damp at all. She couldn't feel any pain in her back. Siwon suddenly rolled over, her gaze falling on the pillow beside her. Her expression froze instantly. Good morning. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Aster slammed the door open. Ola, where are you, Ola? Are you all right? You. Aster gritted his teeth, anger burning in his eyes. You dare to barge into Ola's bedroom while disheveled? Who do you think you are? You're just a fiancé Yet you dare to insult my honor like this. He waved his arm angrily, pointing at the figure on the bed. Get off Ola's bed immediately. Ola reached out, his fingertips gently stroking Siwon's long hair. Lord Aster, please stop. This person has done nothing wrong. He reached out and tightly hugged Siwon's shoulder. Aster frowned, watching the scene before him. I was looking out from the balcony just now and saw Miss Siwon alone in a dark room. So I took it upon myself to invite her. Lord Aster, I want to talk to Miss Siwon. Ola lowered his eyes slightly, his tone pleading. Could you let us be alone for a while? But Aster looked conflicted, his expression hesitant. I also want to have breakfast with her. Just the two of us. What? Aster's eyes widened, his expression one of disbelief. Siwon, I've mostly spent my time in taverns chatting with men. Now, I'd like to talk to another woman. Lord Aster, please. Aura looked at Aster, her eyes filled with plea. Fine, since you insist, I'll arrange it. Aster sighed helplessly. As for the barbarian, Aster turned abruptly, pointing his finger forward with a cold, stern warning. If you dare touch a single hair on Aura's head, I guarantee you will never set foot in the border territories again. The Dilson family is closely connected to the royal family. If I wish, I can turn you barbarians to ash at any moment. The fate of your people depends entirely on your performance. Remember that clearly. Aster threw out one last threat, then turned toward the door and slammed it shut. Siwon stood silently in place, watching his departing back. Did you see the look on his face? She turned her head sharply, waving her fist in indignation. Does a normal person threaten people by taking their clansmen's lives hostage? Though, in a way, he's quite honest. What? Siwon snapped her head around. Are you actually on that guy's side? It's not like that. Aura lowered her eyes slightly. Hey, what do you think of that man? I think it's just a matter of whether he wears a mask or not, right? Yes. Even when he was insulting me, that was his true face. Siwon grit her teeth, anger burning in her eyes. Or should I say, you have quite the quick reflexes? Me? Aura turned to look at the girl. My story, the doctors, and even my family, my father, mother, and my siblings, no one was willing to believe me. Isn't this just your daily habit? Aura tilted her head slightly, watching Siwon. Climbing walls like that, that's not a skill you learn in a day or two, is it? Siwon froze, looking a bit embarrassed. Seriously, Aura's lips curled into a playful smile. I'm just joking. They probably. I just didn't want to believe it. They didn't want to admit their child possessed supernatural powers. Do you think so? Siwon sat among the bedding, looking up at the deep purple silhouette. Yes. Aura walked to the window, gazing at the world outside the glass. Families always cherish their children, though there are exceptions. Siwon froze, staring at Aura's profile, falling into a brief silence. Oh, she suddenly snapped out of it, looking a bit awkward. Could you lend me some clothes? Siwon clutched her green nightgown, speaking bashfully. Go ahead. Aura pointed to one side. The dresses are all in that wardrobe. Thanks. The clothes there have gathered some dust. They haven't been washed yet. Aura pushed open the heavy cabinet doors, a bright smile on her face. Heavens, how can there be so many dresses? The wardrobe is practically bursting. She spread her arms, staring in awe at the dazzling array of magnificent gowns. Pick whatever you like. By the way, how do you usually get dressed? Aura stopped and turned to ask curiously. I'm not used to being touched, so I didn't let Aster arrange for a maid. Aura stood by the window, explaining in a calm tone. I see. So these dresses are all designed so they can be put on alone. Could you look toward the balcony for a moment? I want to change. We're going to bathe together later, yet you're shy now? Doesn't changing in front of others make a proper young lady feel embarrassed? Climbing from the first floor to the third with bare hands. This girl really isn't quite right in the head. I'll borrow this one. By the way, Aura, are you free tomorrow? Why do you ask? Aura turned back, somewhat confused. Isn't it obvious? We're going to the Capitol Library. The carriage sped along the tree-lined avenue, its wheels making a dull, vibrating sound as they rolled over the cobblestones before finally coming to a smooth stop. The coachman jumped down from his seat, opened the door, and bowed slightly. Misoha, thank you very much. She took the coachman's hand and stepped steadily onto the ground. Two guards stood side by side, their expressions solemn as they looked ahead. Aura turned her face slightly, her golden eyes lowered. After you. Miss Siwon, a guard reminded her in a stern, loud voice. Misoha. Siwon closed her eyes, maintaining a calm demeanor as she reached out to her side. Thank you, Aura. As expected of the Capitol Library, it's truly massive. Aura looked around. Where do you want to go? Let me see the guide board. Siwon walked quickly to the notice board, her fingers sliding across the dense text. Found it. I want to go here. Aura followed her finger. Her expression became slightly hesitant. This is The hall was crowded with people. Children darted between the bookshelves. A librarian sat on a bench, reading a picture book to the children gathered around. Aura watched the scene, lost in thought. The children's reading section. Siwen held several books. Come on, Aura, sit down. Aura nodded gently and pulled out a chair. A uniformed guard walked in. Siwen pressed her hands on the table, looking a bit restless. I can't concentrate on reading at all. It's the same for you, isn't it? Aura lowered her eyes, a faint, indifferent smile on her lips. Could you wait a moment? The head guard lowered his voice, his tone respectful but firm. I will stand guard over there. If anything happens, Siwen hurriedly waved her hands. Her face flushed as she defended herself. I won't do anything. Inside the library, bookshelves stood in rows as several guards patrolled in the distance. Siwen's gaze sharpened. This is why I'm holding a weapon right now. I will learn what is trendy and build relationships with other ducal families so they can expose the injustice of my situation. Aura sat quietly, watching Siwen beside her. What a strange woman, to be able to sit down so naturally. Most people run away in fear when they see me. No, she was definitely no ordinary woman. This is a story about a vampire and love. Long ago, there was a vampire who fell in love with a human. The librarian flipped a page, telling the story to the children. One day, the human met with an accident and was gravely injured. The grieving vampire, in order to save them, signed a covenant called the Blood Pact. Aura withdrew her gaze and asked softly, "Have you looked outside yet?" Siwen snapped back to reality and rubbed her cheek awkwardly. There are young ladies everywhere wearing similar dresses. It seems we'll need some time. Miss Siwen, do you believe in the existence of such creatures? Siwen blinked. Such creatures? You mean vampires? Oha no de gentvi. Yes. Siwen lowered her eyes. I think they probably exist. After all, everything exists for a reason. So, there must be a reason for vampires to exist as well. Aura watched the girl, her eyes filled with scrutiny. Siwen lowered her eyes slightly. That was my first love. Aura showed a hint of surprise. Siwen looked down at her hands, her fingers tightly clutching her skirt. That was a handkerchief I embroidered myself. I even gave it to him. Aura's eyes widened, her pupils trembling with disbelief. The embroidered handkerchief you gave to Aster? Siwen closed her eyes and nodded gently. Yes, it had a goldfinch embroidered on it. At a banquet in the capital, I suddenly felt unwell, and he was the one looking after me. That's why I gave him the handkerchief. Writing a thank you letter would have taken too long, so I practically forced it on him. Aura's expression was complex. I've used that handkerchief. Siwen looked up sharply, her eyes wide. What? He asked me if I was the girl who gave him the handkerchief back then. Since it seemed so real, I answered yes. Siwen stood up abruptly, hands braced on the table, her eyes full of shock. That was a banquet hosted by the imperial family. How did you sneak in? Aura lowered her eyes, her expression calm. I said my parents were tailors and that I dressed up specifically to see the prince. Siwen's eyes widened in disbelief, her voice trembling with excitement. He actually believed it? That man actually believed such a story? Aura closed her eyes and replied softly, yes. Siwen held her forehead and let out a long sigh, collapsing back into her chair. Aura watched her, her tone carrying a hint of comfort. In fact, he really does care about you. Siwen looked up, her expression becoming resolute. Regardless of the reason, he is a man who mocks and intimidates you. That is enough. A man who harasses his fiancée just because he claims to love someone else. I don't need such a person in my life. I'll forgive you for impersonating the owner of the handkerchief. Aura froze, a flash of surprise in her eyes. Siwen leaned forward, her expression fervent. Even if you say you embroidered it yourself, it doesn't matter, because the effort I put into that goldfinch was definitely not a lie. Aura turned her head to look at the girl, a trace of confusion in her eyes. Miss Siwen, a pale mask surfaced in her mind. Siwen looked ahead with a serious and determined gaze. Break time is over. We need to continue observing the dresses on the capital streets. Aura leaned forward slightly and asked softly, "May I help too?" Siwen gave a gentle smile. Of course. You're quite free right now, aren't you? You were only listening to stories just now anyway. My eyes are so tired. I just want to take a bath right now. Siwen walked down the empty corridor, her steps a bit heavy. Indeed, but I had a great time going out with you today, Miss Siwen. Aura stopped, noticing the gap in the door. A white letter was tucked there. This is... She reached out her fingertips and picked up the envelope. Is it a letter? Siwen leaned in, her eyes full of curiosity. It says it's a dinner invitation. Aura opened the envelope, her eyes scanning the handwriting. An invitation for you, me, and Lord Astor, the three of us. To deepen our friendship, she read the reason on the letter in a low voice, a flash of doubt in her eyes. It also says he wants to apologize for his previous rudeness. It's set for 5 days from now in the evening. This smells completely like a trap. Saiwen crossed her arms, her tone carrying undisguised wariness. Indeed, what should we do? Saiwen looked at the letter, a playful curve appearing at the corner of her mouth. Then let's accept the challenge. Now, let the strategy meeting begin. Saiwen raised her right hand high, declaring loudly with a fervent expression. Aura sat on the edge of the bed with her arms crossed, looking helplessly at the energetic girl and letting out a long sigh. First, by the way, don't you plan to read those books you borrowed? Aura turned her head, her gaze falling on the neatly stacked volumes on the table. These all look like books written by nobles for leisure. Aura stared at the stack, her eyes skimming the ornate covers. It has to be these specific ones. Aura rested her chin on one hand, a hint of helplessness in her eyes. You said you borrowed them for yourself, yet you're not even looking at them now. Aura let out a long sigh. It seems I'll be dragged along when it's time to return them too. Aura, are you even listening to me? Saiwen leaned toward the mirror, looking seriously at her pondering companion. I'll explain from the beginning. That man's goal is... Saiwen turned her head slightly, her tone becoming low and calm. He plans to announce that he's taking not only me to the ball, but you as well. And he intends to have you wear an expensive gown. Obviously, he wants to use this to humiliate me again. I see. Aura pressed a fingertip to her lower lip, lowering her eyes thoughtfully. That is indeed something he would do. So, I plan to wear a proper gown at that ball. I want him to recognize his place, while simultaneously making him fall completely for my charms. Look, this is the result of my observations today. She took out a thick notebook and handed it to Aura. This is a memo summarizing all the latest fashion trends. Truly impressive. Aura took the notebook and carefully flipped through the contents. It's organized very clearly. Of course it is. Saiwen raised her chin slightly, looking quite proud. So, Aura closed the notebook with a crisp snap. You want me to custom make a gown for you? No. I plan to borrow a gown and then modify it myself. You have sewing tools here, right? She looked around expectantly. Right there, under that table. Aura pointed to a corner. I'm going to use them. Saiwen walked quickly to the table and bent down. She pulled out a heavy toolbox. You actually prepared both right-handed and left-handed scissors? Saiwen opened the heavy wooden box, her fingertips lightly touching the neatly arranged sewing tools. Her eyes were full of surprise. Yes, when handling blades, I'm used to using my left hand. I explained calmly. However, I can use my right hand just as well. Neither Astor nor the servants seemed to have noticed this. True, if you hadn't mentioned it, I wouldn't have noticed at all. Can I borrow this dark blue dress? She took a heavy gown from the rack, but once I start modifying it, it probably won't be able to go back to its original state. It's fine. Do as you like. Can you really sew clothes? Aura watched as Saiwen skillfully spread out the fabric, her voice tinged with curiosity. Of course, I never allow any flaws on my person. Saiwen shook out the skirt forcefully, her gaze becoming sharp and focused. That includes the clothes I wear. That's why I specifically learned how to sew. She bowed her head and began taking careful measurements. I see. Saiwen took a deep breath, her expression becoming incredibly serious. To be honest, I'm only enduring this for now because I have no other choice. But I will turn all this frustration into motivation to prove him wrong. Saiwen looked up sharply, her eyes burning with the fire of resentment. I refuse to let this end while I still owe someone something. Otherwise, I won't be able to rest in peace. I'm going to turn this into my victory. Aura watched the girl silently, a flash of complex emotion in her eyes. So, exactly, because it's just too infuriating. Saiwen's movements with the needle and thread became rapid and forceful. I won't act like a pathetic person with nothing to wear while that man mocks me for not having a gown. You call this a strategy meeting? Aura watched Saiwen's busy back and sighed helplessly. This sounds more like a strategic declaration. However, Aura partially closed her eyes, her gaze deep and calm. I also have my own goals that I must achieve at that ball. To realize them, I need Saiwen to distract that man. Hey, Saiwen, Aura called softly. What is it? Saiwen stopped her work and looked back in confusion. Do you want me to teach you about how to seduce Astor? Aura leaned close to her ear, a playful smile on her lips. Why bring that up all of a sudden? Siwon froze, looking a bit flustered, even though I'll likely attend that ball too. Aura straightened up and spread her palms, her expression becoming composed and elegant. To put it bluntly, Aster will be an obstacle to my goal. So, I need your help. Of course, no problem. Siwon lowered her head again, her fingers guiding the silver needle through the fabric. But you don't mind if I keep sewing, right? It's fine. Aura, turn around. It's not like this is physical labor anyway. Oh, that's great. Thank you. First, Aura sat down with graceful movements. For that man's taste, your way of speaking, Dot is a bit too energetic. What do you mean? Siwon stopped her sewing and looked back, puzzled. You need to use a softer, breathier voice. Aura tilted her head slightly, her eyes half closed as if intoxicated by fine wine or someone's embrace. Exactly. That's the feeling. I think the state you were in as a child in the garden was perfect. But if he's attracted to that kind of look, isn't that man just a pervert? Siwon frowned, a trace of disgust in her eyes. Well, if you must put it that way, then yes. The point is, you need to appear more suggestive. That man likes submissive women, so this should be easy for you. Aura leaned closer to Siwon, her tone low and suggestive. Then do I just need to mimic how you usually act? Pretty much. I understand. Siwon lowered her head, her fingertips lightly stroking her chin as she fell into thought. Good evening, Lord Aster. Siwon turned her head slightly, her fingers brushing her shoulder, her eyes hazy and soft. I'd really like to go for a walk with you. Lord Aster is wonderful. You're a quick learner. Aura watched the girl, a satisfied smile on her lips. Right? There's nothing I can't do. Siwon put her hands on her hips, looking quite proud. With a bit more practice, you could become an excellent liar. Aura teased softly, playfulness in her eyes. You always have a hidden meaning, don't you? Siwon glanced sideways, looking a bit helpless. 5 days later, night shrouded the magnificent manor. Lights flickered behind the windows. The heavy doors were slowly pushed open with a soft creak. A foot in a white leather shoe stepped firmly onto the ornate carpet. Aster adjusted his tie, a gentle smile on his face. You're here. Aura lowered her hands slightly, her eyes reflecting her usual melancholy and composure. She wore a pure white off-the-shoulder gown. Beside her, Siwon looked solemn, her orange-pink hair falling over her shoulders. She wore the purple checkered gown she had sewn herself, her gaze fixed firmly ahead. Inside the empty dining room, exquisite tableware was already set on the long table. Thank you very much for your invitation today. Siwon lifted her skirt slightly and performed an elegant curtsy, her demeanor dignified and proper. Sit down. Aster sat at the head of the table, his tone flat and composed. Siwon, sit on the right. Aura, sit on the left, facing each other in front of me. Siwon and Aura sat side by side instead, smiling at each other, looking close and natural. Aster's brow furrowed slightly, a hint of confusion in his eyes. Wait, this isn't right. He suddenly stood up, hands braced on the table, looking a bit agitated. My dominant hand is my right, while Siwon's dominant hand is her left. Siwon turned her head, a playful smile on her lips as she watched the man across from her. If we sat like that, our elbows would keep bumping into each other. Right, Aura? Yes, my dominant hand is indeed my left. Aura nodded slightly, looking somewhat innocent. Tisish. Aster sat back down, letting out a displeased click of his tongue. This is my strategy. Siwon lowered her eyes, staring at the soup already placed before her. If the food was served before we arrived, there's a good chance mine has been tampered with. Now, let me see. Aster looked a bit flustered. As expected, looking at his reaction, my intuition was right. Is there a problem? Aster leaned in, a hint of panic in his eyes. Of course not. Hey, take Aura's portion away and replace it. Aster turned and quickly ordered the attendant behind him. As you wish. The attendant bowed and swiftly removed the plate. Oh, is there something wrong with Aura's food? Siwon turned her head, her gaze filled with scrutiny. It's nothing. Aster sat back down, avoiding her gaze. It's just that the food you were about to eat has gone cold. There's something I must tell you. A grand banquet will be held in 5 days. Aster sat at the head of the table, his expression cold. It's a celebration hosted by the imperial family. Usually, I would go alone, but even if Siwon is only my fiancé in name, this is an engagement mandated by the imperial family. So, I must take her with me. However, Siwon has lived on the border all her life and knows nothing of capital etiquette. I'm not sure she understands the rules of high society. Sorry, Aura, can you go with her? Of course. I'm really happy to be able to attend the banquet with Aura. Saiwen raised her hand to her chest, her expression exceptionally bright, her eyes reflecting uncontrollable joy. Aster's brow was tightly knit, his eyes filled with confusion and disbelief as he watched this unexpected reaction. Yes, Miss Saiwen, I am equally honored. Aura lowered her hands slightly, a gentle curve appearing on her lips. One more thing. Aster rested his chin on his hand, frowning. Aura's dress is already being custom-made. But Saiwen, because you came to the capital suddenly by imperial decree, I haven't had time to prepare a gown for you. He spread his hands, looking somewhat helpless. It's too late to call a tailor now. Aster's lips curled into a cold smile. Aura, though it's asking a lot, could you lend a gown to Saiwen? Of course, Lord Aster. Aura turned her head slightly, her expression submissive and gentle. Attending a banquet with both his fiancée and mistress. Is he serious? Saiwen closed her eyes, a stiff smile on her face. We will definitely become the laughingstock of the whole event. Then I'll leave it to you. Yes, I don't know what kind of style Miss Saiwen likes. Would Miss Saiwen like to choose one herself? Yes, of course. Aster remained silent, his brow furrowed. Saiwen closed her eyes with a serene smile. 5 nights later, the imperial city was brilliantly lit. The grand architectural complexes stood tall in the night, emitting points of warm light. The banquet hall was bustling. Noble women held folding fans, talking in low voices. Guests dressed in finery moved through the room, the atmosphere noisy and lively. Let's go, Saiwen. Aster turned his face, his tone low and cold. Yes, Saiwen replied softly, her hand in a dark long glove resting lightly on the man's arm as she stepped forward with him. She lifted her magnificent skirt, her blue high heels stepping steadily into the hall where light and shadow intertwined. Saiwen wore a dark blue off-the-shoulder evening gown with a magnificent jewel necklace around her neck. Her gaze was cold and noble as she made an elegant entrance under everyone's gaze. Aster led Saiwen into the hall as everyone watched. Silva followed quietly behind them, looking steady and calm. Is that young lady the one who is to become the Duchess of Dilson? The gown is truly beautiful. Saiwen closed her eyes, a shallow smile surfacing. It seems my prediction was completely correct. The fashion trends are exactly as I expected. A red skirt trailed on the floor, making a slight rustling sound. Saiwen stopped, a trace of solemnity in her eyes. Lady Marwada wore a white eye mask and a magnificent red and black gown. She is the wife of Duke Marwada. Do not be rude to her. Aster leaned into Saiwen's ear, whispering the reminder. Lady Marwada, even living on the border, I've heard that name. Masks covering the eyes. People without masks at this ball were probably the minority. Saiwen closed her eyes with a proper smile. Long time no see, Duke Dilson. Aster bowed slightly. Lady Marwada, it has indeed been a long time. What a beautiful gown. Seeing you, I felt the same excitement as when I met my husband. You look truly stunning. Duke Dilson is very lucky to have such a perfect bride. Aster gave a few dry laughs. One interesting remark. Saiwen's eyes held a trace of scrutiny. It sounds like she already knows he has a mistress outside. May I borrow your future wife for a moment? Lady Marwada unfolded a red fan, covering half her face. I'd like to have a private chat with her. She turned her head slightly, and a bite mark was faintly visible beneath the black lace choker on her neck. Saiwen's eyes widened as she stared at the mark, her expression looking a bit shocked. Of course, Aster released her arm. My fiancée still needs to adapt to the capital, so please look after her. Standing by a mistress at a time like this is a truly terrible move. Even if this is an engagement personally ordered by the king, it must be a disaster. Lady Marwada held her red fan, a hint of pity in her tone. Saiwen lowered her hands, looking a bit forlorn. You're right, but it's the king's order. If we view this marriage as a way to eliminate national unrest. Saiwen looked up, her gaze becoming firm and sharp. Then, as a descendant of Ligwin who protects the nation, I am more than happy to serve. Lady Marwada stopped her movements. She stared at the girl. I thought you were just an unfortunate little girl, but it seems I was wrong. You performed exceptionally well. Saiwen bowed slightly. Thank you very much for the compliment. Lady Marwada turned. Actually, my husband also attended the meeting that decided your engagement. He is here today as well. Right over there. Saiwen followed her gaze. A middle-aged man stood in the center of the crowd. His hair was graying, and his expression was serious and cold as he talked with the nobles beside him. He is currently in a complex discussion with members of the royal family, so he cannot come over to say hello. I'm sorry. Saiwen withdrew her gaze, looking calm and proper. No, It's perfectly fine. Lady Marwada closed her fan and gave a soft invitation. Come to my estate for tea sometime. After all, we can't have a long talk here. A polite curve appeared on Siwen's lips. I accept your invitation, Lady Marwada. Then I shall take my leave. Lady Marwada bowed slightly. We'll talk again next time. Siwen watched her leave, then closed her eyes and let out a soft sigh. Excuse me, do you have a moment? Several young women suddenly gathered around. Suin's expression held a hint of confusion. Wow, this dress is beautiful. It suits you perfectly. They crowded around Suin, their eyes sparkling with excitement. Can we chat with you? Of course. Suin gave a polite smile. She turned her head, her gaze moving past the crowd to settle on Aura and Aster in the distant corner. Aura said he had another purpose for attending the banquet tonight, but now it seemed he was having trouble getting away from Aster. Considering everything that had happened so far, I think I should repay part of the debt first. Lord Aster, Suin called out softly. Aster turned around. Oh, you're back quickly. It seems this kind of occasion is still too much for you. Yes, I feel like I'm about to be swallowed by the crowd. Suin lowered her eyes, her expression showing a hint of weariness. So, I'd like to go outside for some fresh air to calm down. Lord Aster, could you accompany me? Aster remained silent, a flash of hesitation in his eyes. But I can't leave Aura alone. I just saw an acquaintance. Aura spread a folding fan to cover half of his face, his eyes melancholy and deep. May I go and chat with him? Aura, are you sure you don't need me to accompany you? Aster asked in a low voice. Yes, after all, they're all women. A playful smile curled at the corner of Aura's mouth. If they saw Lord Aster up close, I'm afraid they'd all fall in love with you. Let's go. Aster turned and signaled Suin to follow. All right, Suin replied softly. Thank you, Suin. Suin withdrew her gaze and followed Aster through the long corridor toward the secluded terrace. Phew, the wind feels so good. Suin closed her eyes, letting her hair flutter in the breeze, looking relaxed and content. Aster stood aside, his brow furrowed, his eyes showing a hint of irritation. Damn it, why does this woman always make me feel so restless? He clenched his fists, his knuckles turning slightly white. That girl called Aura in the Kim family. Why does she feel so different? This woman is clearly the daughter of that barbarian. Suin remained smiling, immersed in the breeze. I know it can't be her, but why do I always see her shadow in this woman? Lord Aster, are you all right? Suin turned her head, her eyes showing concern. Aster avoided her gaze and gave a perfunctory reply. I'm fine. A quiet smile hung on Suin's lips. Aster's heart skipped a beat, a heavy thumping echoing in his chest. Don't smile. This feeling. What on earth is it? Why would she make that expression? Clearly, you're the one benefiting from this engagement. I'm the only one being sacrificed. Aster suddenly reached out. Suin's eyes widened in terror. Losing her balance, she fell heavily onto the stone steps. Aster took the opportunity to press down on her, pinning her firmly beneath him. No, what are you doing? Suin's breathing was ragged as she pushed against his chest. Aster suddenly leaned down and grabbed her collar roughly. I'll make you see clearly, you idiot. Do you think this cheap sympathy can change anything? Haha, so the barbarian's daughter can also make. Such an unpleasant expression. ST, stop. What are you saying? Aster let out a cold snort, his gaze growing increasingly sinister. Wearing such seductive clothes. You're absolutely hypocritical. This is what you wanted, isn't it? Aster leaned in closer, his shadow looming over the woman beneath him. Suin squeezed her eyes shut. No, heavy footsteps sounded, high heels clicking sharply against the stone floor. Aster was startled, freezing in place. He slowly turned his head. Aura stood at the porch, long hair covering one side of his face. What is going on here, Lord Aster? Why? Aura's right hand tightly gripped the front of his clothes, his fingertips trembling slightly. His voice echoed across the empty terrace. No, it's not like that. Aster stood up in a panic, releasing his hold on Suin. This woman, she was the one who pestered me first. Aura pushed him aside. Miss Suin, Miss Suin. Aura rushed forward. He wrapped a cloak around Suin. Oha! Suin looked at the back of the figure standing in front of her with terror. Aura turned his head, his eyes melancholy yet determined. Lord Aster, I'm grateful to you. Grateful that you once showed mercy to someone like me. I have always respected you, but Aura lowered his eyes, his voice trembling slightly in the cold wind. Because of what you did tonight, I hate you. Aster froze, his face turning ghastly pale, his pupils contracting in shock. Aura stopped looking at him, supporting Suin as they turned to leave. Their figures disappeared at the end of the terrace. Suin sat in the carriage, her body still somewhat stiff. Oha, why did you come looking for me? Your business. Aura comforted her softly. It's okay. Everything is over. Suin's expression was blank, her eyes still reflecting the lingering fear. This is a rented carriage. Dearson's people aren't here. They can't hear us. Just pretend I'm not here. I'm not. Suin bowed her head, her hands tightly clutching her skirt, her fingertips trembling slightly. Tears streamed down her face. Suin finally couldn't hold back her sobs. I was so scared. Why did that man treat me like that? It was supposed to be a rare banquet. I'm so frustrated. Aura reached out and took Suin into his arms, letting her lean on his shoulder to vent. The carriage stopped on a quiet street. Let's go somewhere with fewer people. Aura helped Suin out of the carriage. I know this area well. We won't run into anyone we know. Suin entered the bathroom alone, shed the heavy dress, and stepped into the tub filled with warm water. Hurry up and wash it all away. Aura stood behind her, gently wiping her with a towel. Today, I saw those people, the ones who might have murdered my family. I decided to attend tonight's banquet just to confirm the truth. I even went to their manor. Aura looked up, a hint of desolation in his eyes. I approached them and talked to them for a long time, but found nothing. It seems in the end, I'll have to infiltrate the interior of the manor. Hee, that's going to be quite a project. Aura let out a self-deprecating chuckle. Suin sat nearby, her expression becoming increasingly grave. Murdered your family? What are you suddenly talking about? What do you mean? Exactly what it sounds like. Aura turned around and looked directly into her eyes. When I say family, I mean everyone in the village. They were all my family. Why did that happen? Was it because of a conflict? Suin pressed. I just went out to play for a while. When I came back, that everyone was gone. Later, I found out they had all been murdered. At that time, the village, that had been completely wiped off the map. How could this be? Suin whispered, her eyes full of shock. All right, don't make that face. Just soak in the tub. Aura held her shoulders and guided her toward the warm pool. Aura, Suin suddenly called out. Aura stopped and turned. His hair covered half of his face. I thought telling a fictional story that might distract you. Suin froze, somewhat at a loss. Everything I just said was a made-up story. So please, don't be sad anymore. Don't look so sorrowful. Aura turned his head, his smile appearing blurred in the steam. The eyes under the mask watched coldly. Aura, what kind of expression are you making right now? Even if that I could see your face, what could I say to you? Suin lowered her head and adjusted her bathrobe, her hands tightly clutching the fabric at her chest. The night was deep, and the manor looked exceptionally cold under the moonlight. A sharp shattering sound came from the wine cellar. Glass shards flew everywhere, and a purple liquid spread across the floor. Damn it, Aster roared in rage. It's all because of that woman. That's why things ended up like this. I'll never forgive her. I absolutely cannot forgive her. Aster gritted his teeth, his eyes burning with the fire of humiliation. The candle flame flickered, casting a distorted silhouette on the wall. But in that situation, I was the attacker. No, I don't need to feel guilty. Aster suddenly covered his face. A savage look peered through his fingers. I'm not wrong. He panted heavily, sweat sliding down his cheeks. That was a necessary punishment. Lord Aster, please calm down. You'll hurt yourself. Stop. A maid rushed forward in terror, trying to grab the wine bottle from his hand. This woman, that's Suin's maid. If she hadn't let Suin out of the storage room, none of this would have happened. Aster swung his arm violently, pushing the maid heavily to the ground. In that case, you'll take the place of that wine and soothe me properly, Suin. Aster murmured in a low voice. His eyes were bloodshot. No, you're mistaken. I'm not Miss Suin. The maid struggled desperately. Stop struggling, Aura. Aster suddenly lunged at her, pinning her firmly to the cold floor. Lord Aster, please wake up. I beg of you. The maid let out a desperate plea, her voice echoing in the empty wine cellar. The maid's eyes widened suddenly as she let out a piercing scream. Lord Aster, a hand that reached out desperately toward the void. The scream was swallowed by a deathly silence. The manor stood silent in the night, cold moonlight spilling over the heavy iron gates. The white manor stood under the clear sky, petals drifting past the terrace. In the depth of the bright moon, Suin stood by the pool, suddenly swinging her arm to throw a stone far away. The stone skipped across the water, creating a series of crisp ripples. She turned around excitedly. I did it. That's a new record. Did you see that, Aura? Aura sat quietly behind her. Yes. Miss Suin. Suin's smile faded, her expression gradually becoming lonely. Aura watched her profile, a hint of melancholy in his eyes. 20 days had passed since that banquet. Aster had been avoiding both of them since that night. He seemed buried in work, as if suppressing some kind of impulse. Suin strolled through the garden with a light smile on her face. On the surface, she had recovered. But since that night, she had never worn a cool-toned dress again. This is all because of that man. Aster can still be useful for my goals. That thought has never changed. But every time I see him, I just want to kill him. On the night of the banquet, Aura stood alone on the terrace, the moonlight lengthening his shadow. Just as I was confirming who the real killer of my family was and trying to obtain evidence, Suin's scream reached his ears. Suin's terrified cry tore through the night sky. I didn't hesitate for a second. He rushed over instinctively. I must save her. Aura pushed open the heavy doors, and the sight before him took his breath away. Revenge is my goal. I must not let Suin distract me. Aura lowered his eyes. If this continues, there will be no turning back. I must stop my involvement with her. I have no choice but to abandon her. Suin stood in the sunlight, her hair fluttering gently in the breeze as she smiled toward the front. Her expression was pure and innocent. Aura suddenly withdrew his gaze, his eyes becoming cold and deep. He turned his back on that brilliant color. Aura, what's wrong? Suin tilted her head in confusion, her gaze following Aura's. I'm Fine. I'm just going to stay near the gate for a while. If someone comes in, I'll return immediately. Aura turned his head, a faint smile on his lips. Aura stopped and watched the departing back. Outside the black iron gate, a figure draped in a dark cloak stood quietly. Igor stood across the fence, his mouth curling into an amused arc. Oh, it's been a long time. Aura walked to the gate, folded his arms across his chest, and looked coldly at the uninvited guest. What are you doing here, Igor? Actually. Igor leaned close to his ear and lowered his voice. Aura closed his eyes, listening to the secret intel with a grim expression. So, the new government faction is finally going to take complete control over the old powers? He opened his eyes again, lost in thought. Yes, I'm afraid it's only a matter of time. In that case, this marriage. That is meaningless, isn't it? Igor was slightly stunned, his gaze flickering under his hood. Go tell Darius. Ligwin's daughter indeed has great potential. Tell him he must take action before Dearson's wedding ends. If it's Darius's relative, I can feel at ease handing her over. Ligwin's people, though only mortals, possess great power. Even if she is the youngest daughter, the blood of Ligwin still flows in her. Igor rested his chin on his hand, a playful smile on his face. It's a pity for her to stay in this house. Shut your filthy mouth. Aura suddenly interrupted him. Is that all the nonsense you have to say? Yes, please forgive my rudeness. Igor bowed. He then turned and left, his cloak snapping in the wind, introducing her to Darius. Perhaps I really went too far. Aura stood alone behind the gate, a trace of undetectable wavering in his eyes. Regardless, I should return to Suin's side. Aura started walking, his skirt trailing with a faint sound on the ground. Is it because there's no wind today? I feel like something is wrong. He passed through the dense shadows of the trees, a nameless agitation rising in his heart. Suin, he stopped by the pool, panting. Where are you going? The water surface suddenly rippled violently. Suin's eyes widened, her pupils contracting in shock. Miss Suin, without a moment's hesitation, he plunged into the icy water. Aura struggled hard in the water, his long hair spreading like seaweed. Damn it, these clothes are in the way. He took off his clothes and wig. The water surface suddenly burst open. Aura, bare-chested, rushed out of the pool. His arms were wrapped tightly around the drowning girl. Suin, Aura dragged her to the shore. Suin was deathly pale, her soaked white dress clinging to her cold body. Blood kept trickling from her temple, staining the stone tiles by the pool. A wound like this, she must have been attacked. Even if I find a doctor now, it might already be. Suin, don't die. Please don't die. Before you get revenge on that man, you can't just die like this, can you? So, please, whatever you do, don't die. The pool water flowed quietly. Aura knelt on the shore, cradling the body that was gradually growing cold. I'm sorry, he whispered, a pair of sharp fangs appearing at the tips of his lips. Aura leaned down, trembling as he approached that pulsing pulse. He suddenly opened his mouth, and his fangs pierced the skin, sinking deep into the girl's neck. Suin lay quietly on the ornate bed, her hands folded over her stomach. Her eyes were closed, her breathing steady and deep. Her fingertips twitched slightly on the silk sheets. She slowly opened her eyes, her consciousness gradually peeling away from the chaos. What? The world had never been so clear. The outlines and colors of everything seemed to be redrawn. She could even see the dust most notes floating in the air. What's happening? Are you awake? A gentle inquiry came from a doorway. Oha. Aura's expression held an irrepressible concern. That's right, I remember now. At the spring, after saying goodbye to Aura, Suin lowered her eyes as memories flooded back like a tide. I sensed an unusual presence behind me and turned around quickly. My head was struck hard, and then I fell into the spring, right? Suin raised a hand to her forehead. She tried to piece together the broken memories. Yes, and then you died. Aura responded calmly, his tone devoid of any fluctuation. Suin looked up sharply. That's not a very funny joke. She looked at Aura sitting by the bed. The lines on the mask, they hadn't changed. Aura, you saved me, didn't you? Suin urgently sought confirmation. I wish I could have saved you, but I didn't get there in time. Aura bowed his head, his voice tinged with a sense of powerlessness. When I went back, Suin, you were no longer breathing. So I brought you back to the world of the living. You brought me back? But how? Suin tilted her head slightly, her eyes full of confusion. Like a demon, you sold your soul. Aura's face was stern, his tone low and suppressed. Suin froze, her breath catching for a moment. What? Do you remember the story about vampires you read in the library? Aura watched her. The same thing happened to you. A person who suffered an accident and was gravely injured was granted a contract called love by a grieving vampire. The human was then reborn as a vampire. So you mean you're a vampire? Suin stared at him. And you brought me back through that contract? Yes, that's right. This kind of contract isn't much different from the descriptions in the Royal Capital's books. Aura raised a hand to touch his chest. A vampire can turn a human into one of their kind by drinking the blood near the heart. But the content of the contract goes far beyond that. He lowered his eyes, his gaze becoming deep and cold. There's more, much more. Suin stood opposite him, looking somewhat uneasy. Once a human and a vampire enter into a contract, it can never be broken. They will no longer be able to drink anyone else's blood. They can only quench their thirst through each other's blood. If they violate this, both will face destruction. Then that means, without your blood. Suin's eyes widened, her breathing becoming rapid. I won't be able to survive? She asked. Aura remained silent, his eyes revealing complex emotions. Aura is a vampire. The scene on the terrace flashed through Suin's mind. At that time, he had used only one hand to steadily catch her as she fell. She had thought it was a man's strength, but now everything had an answer. I am no longer human, am I? Suin tightly gripped the sheet beneath her knuckles. That's stiff from the force. Sin. Aura called her name softly, his eyes showing a hint of worry. Aura tentatively reached out, but suddenly another hand covered his. Suin gripped his palm tightly. I've had enough of those pointless expectations. Suin suddenly leaned in close. She stepped barefoot on the sheets, her movements intense and resolute. So what if I'm a vampire? I don't care at all. Even if I'm no longer human, nothing about me will change. Besides, facing a fiancé like that man, if I didn't get some supernatural power out of this deal, it will be too unfair. This isn't my fault. Suin raised her hand to her chest, her fingers tightly clutching the fabric of her nightgown. Back then, I was so depressed that I couldn't even resist. I thought I had lost everything. That man told me these clothes were meant to seduce men, so I never dared to wear similar dresses to banquets again. Even though I knew it was a lie, I couldn't help but doubt if something was really wrong with me. The day Aster attacked me, it was entirely his fault. This wasn't a competition at all. I didn't do anything wrong. There's absolutely no need to worry, Aura. Suin stopped her movements. What is it? Aura replied softly. You don't have to imitate Aura's tone of voice anymore. A confident smile appeared on Suin's lips. I'm not afraid of anything anymore. Thank you for always looking out for me. Aura froze in place. I understand. If that man dares to try again, Suin's eyes held a fierce glint. I will definitely tear him to pieces. About having to rely on drinking blood to survive. Since you signed the contract, that applies to you too, doesn't it? Yes, Aura replied softly. Then Suin slowly reached out her right hand. I look forward to walking with you until the very end of hell. A brilliant smile blossomed on her face. Mr. Masked Vampire. Aura's eyes widened slightly as he watched the hand extended toward him. For a moment, his expression was one of shock. But then a gentle curve appeared at the corner of his mouth, and his gaze became soft yet firm. Likewise, Aura took her hand in return. Aura, look, isn't this dress beautiful? Suin spun around lightly in front of the mirror, her skirt blooming like a wave. It perfectly highlights my charm. You've been fussing in front of the mirror for a full half hour. Aura picked up his teacup. Don't you feel tired at all? Phew, all that hard work sewing was worth it. I just love this light and exquisite feeling. To achieve that exquisite texture, we broke several sewing needles. Suin's eyes widened, looking a bit sheepish. I'm still working hard to adapt and learn how to control a vampire's strength. Vampires transformed from humans are usually physically weaker than natural-born ones, Aura had told her. But I inherited the blood of Ligwin. That was a family with great power. Her expression became serious. It seems I've already surpassed the scope of an ordinary vampire. Progress always comes with sacrifice. Suin suddenly stood up and raised her clenched fist. Thanks to those broken needles, I've finally mastered this power. You can never have too much power. Aura sat at the table, watching the vibrant girl with a hint of relief in his eyes. It's good that she found herself again. Aura turned his head slightly, his gaze deep and calm. After those events, I investigated the entire incident, and found that the culprit was actually the maid who served Suin. You're the one who attacked Miss Suin, aren't you? Aura looked at the maid before him with a cold gaze. Under heavy pressure, she finally confessed everything. After the banquet ended, Aster had attacked this maid, leaving her bruised and battered. She admitted that this was her motive for betrayal. He dared to strike a fiancé appointed by the Imperial Forest. Normally, I should have handed her over to the knights, but the truth of Suin's resurrection must not be revealed to the outside world. For now, though, we must avoid everyone's eyes. So, I had her leave a resignation letter, then expelled her and sent Igor to secretly monitor her every move. The real trouble is that Aster is still at large. Aura clenched his fists, his knuckles pressing against his dark skirt. What's worse is that after the maid left, that man seemed to regret his past actions. He's planning to find an opportunity to express his apologies. Even if his apology is sincere, there's no telling how Suin will react. Aura lowered his eyes, his expression cold and melancholy. Even if the apology goes smoothly, so what? The memories of those scars and everything lost can never be recovered. What's wrong, Aura? Suin turned back. If you bite your lip any harder, it's going to bleed. You can see my face? Aura was startled. But this mask, when you reveal your true nature, the part below the nose disappears. Suin stood with her hands on her hips, her tone certain, though those childish doodles remain. I see. Aura raised his hand, clad in a red glove, his fingertips touching his lips as he fell into thought. Oh no, we're going to be late. We have to leave immediately. Suin cried out. Is it already that time? Aura glanced at the clock. We're going to Duke Malvada's territory, right? Exactly. We promised at the banquet. Suin lightly lifted her skirt. I was invited to a tea party. Didn't we just discuss this? She put her hands on her hips and puffed out her cheeks, staring at Aura. You didn't listen to a single word about this dress, did you? Aura silently averted his gaze. He had no words. Then, I'll see you out, Suin. Thank you, Aura. Aura pushed open the heavy room door. His leather shoes made a crisp sound on the corridor floor. Suin, Aura. An urgent call echoed from the end of the hallway. Could I have a moment of your time? Aster, dressed in a white suit, stood in the middle of the corridor, his expression tense. Aura stepped aside, firmly shielding Suin behind him, his gaze cold and wary. Thank you. I'm Euphine. Suin softly comforted her companion and slowly stepped out from behind him. Lord Aster, may I ask why you're looking for me? She stopped, maintaining a polite yet distant space. I am currently preparing to head to Duke Malvada's territory. I'm afraid my time is very limited. I know. Aster suddenly looked up, his expression appearing somewhat anxious. I want to apologize to you. To both of you. His tone was sincere, even carrying a hint of humility. Could you please stay for a moment? Suin watched him quietly, an inscrutable smile hanging on her lips. Well then. Suin nodded slightly, her tone as flat as water. Really? Aster looked up sharply, a flash of hope in his eyes. Then, when will be the best time? As soon as possible. My schedule is already full of various social invitations coming one after another. Suin turned her face, a polite yet distant smile on her lips. I'm afraid I can't spare any time immediately. This month will probably be very difficult. I am truly sorry. Aster stood frozen on the spot, his face turning slightly pale. A bead of cold sweat broke out on his temple. Siwin turned around, her blue skirt tracing a cold arc in the air. Wait a second. Aster took half a step forward, his outstretched hand suspended in midair, but he could only watch helplessly as she walked away. Miss Siwin. Aura followed closely behind, walking down the long corridor with steady steps. The intervals between your feedings seemed to be getting longer and longer. He leaned close to Siwon's ear. His voice dropped very low. Please be sure to keep that in mind. Yes, I understand, Siwon replied softly, a hint of determination in her eyes. Please take care. Aura raised his hand, clad in a red glove, and waved it gently in the air, maintaining a polite smile on his face. You must be careful. He watched Siwon walk away, his gaze gradually growing deep and melancholy.